It seems that Google and other big tech companies are doing really good PR work at distracting everyone from what's really happening. So, the ultimate question then is, when will this quantum revolution arrive? Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to Chip Stock Investor. We're merely a couple years into the current generative AI race, but some investors are already looking for the next big thing. One of those next big things could be quantum computing.
Yeah, it certainly could be the next big thing. And if you hear some of the headlines, some of the research, especially some of the long range predictions for quantum computing, you'll see a lot of overlap with that current generative AI supercycle that we're hearing a lot about.
Yeah, I feel like we can thank the Marvel Cinematic Universe for putting the term quantum realm into our consciousness. Promises of quantum computing range from a better quality of life to trillions of dollars in economic value, and promises of fortunes to be made. And this may sound very familiar to what was going on before generative AI took hold.
Yeah, we can just show you one example here from researcher McKinsey. Last year, they were talking about the potential quantum computing industry being worth $106 billion per year, perhaps by the year 2040, 15, 16 years down the road. And this year, in their quantum technology ecosystem report, the rise of quantum computing, they've bumped that all the way up to 173 billion by 2040. Again, Casey, a lot of this just overlaps with the current AI infrastructure. And it does appear that at some point, all this AI infrastructure is really just to say accelerated computing infrastructure, ripping out the old infrastructure and data centers and replacing it with accelerated compute systems like what Nvidia makes, like what AMD makes, and so on. And eventually, at some point, quantum computing can be the next step in further accelerating how fast we can compute things. But the skepticism, I think, is warranted. We're excited about quantum computing, but in measured steps, in measured doses. And maybe just point out, we wrote about one of the pure play quantum computing stocks multiple times over the last few years since it went public back in 2021. But IonQ, ticker symbol IONQ, trades on the New York Stock Exchange. We wrote about it in October and then again in December, telling investors to be leery of this one because it had jumped to pretty unsustainable levels on the back of all the AI infrastructure hype. And you can see what has happened since then as reality has settled in. So I guess that's our high level message to all of you here is yes, quantum computing is exciting. There's tremendous potential for it as a technology to solve really big, impossible problems that we cannot solve right now, even with NVIDIA's really, really crazy fast AI systems. But let's talk about some of the realities of this first, maybe get a high level understanding of what it is. And then in subsequent videos, we'll talk more about some of the opportunities and how you can make smart, measured bets on the gradual advance of quantum computing.
To understand quantum computing, you first have to understand classical computing. And this slide may look very familiar to you. We've used this before. There's three parts of a classical computing system. The first is computing. That's where the chips do all the number crunching, the logic of the computing system. The second part is networking. That's where information is managed and moves to different parts of the network between logic chips, from data storage to logic, or into and out of the data center. Storage is the third part. That's where information is stored, either in queue waiting for compute processing or in long-term storage to be used later on command. We can add a fourth component for quantum computing. That's sensors, highly sensitive instruments used to detect and record quantum mechanical effects.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, in an electronic system, you have sensors as well. You have these analog sensors, the analog devices that take in and measure some sort of real world signal and converts it to digital data. But in a quantum computer itself, these sensors are even more important because we're no longer dealing with traditional binary code like in a classical computer.
The computers that we use today, from a PC to a smartphone to any smart device at work or in the home, is based on bits of binary code. The bits are recorded in ones and zeros, which are created by on off electrical switches called transistors. These days, the most advanced chips contain many billions of transistors, and then on off gates mean massive amounts of binary ones and zeros that can be collected, recorded, processed, moved, and stored in computing memory.
Classical computing. That's literally everything we use today, from the smartphone riding around in your pocket to your PC to the computing systems that you find in your car, devices at work, around your home, whatever. Quantum computing is entirely different because rather than that binary code of ones and zeros that arise from the flow of electricity, quantum computers tap into the complexities of the world far smaller than atoms, subatomic particles. And these things exhibit behavior that really is incomprehensible to our daily experience. The measured states of these particles are called qubits, the equivalent of a bit in classical computing. Qubits make use of three basic properties of quantum mechanics to help accelerate and dramatically increase the amount of data that can be recorded and stored in a quantum computer.
The first thing we'll talk about is superposition. That is the probability that a particle can be in any possible state between 1 and 0 at any given time. The state of the particle can be measured to find its exact state in that given moment. However, this no defined value property that produces a range of probabilities for the state of a particle means superposition allows for the encoding of more information than just binary ones or zeros. Think of this coin flip as a bit in a classical expression of computing, where heads equals 1 and 0 equals tails in a binary outcome. However, this expression stated as a qubit or quantum expression, the probability of heads is 50% and tails is 50%. And just that statement inherently contains a lot more information.
Okay, that brings us to quantum mechanical effect number two, entanglement. Entanglement is this invisible connection between two or more particles where an influence on or measured state of one particle yields a definite known result of the other entangled particles. For example, quantum particles exhibit spin. So if one particle is measured as spinning up, it's then known that the entangled particle is spinning down. This becomes really powerful, again, when a quantum computer can influence the state and spin of one particle entangled with others, because thanks to entanglement, when the computer influences and measures the state of one particle, it then knows the state of all the other entangled particles or qubits, creating this ability to exponentially encode more information with just the one reading. And we have another example here. If you spin a gear in a mechanical system and there are other gears attached to that one gear, if you know the direction of spin of the first gear, you can actually then calculate exactly what the spin of all the other gears attached to it is going to be as well.
Okay, let's move on to the last property in quantum mechanics, interference. Interference is used along with entanglement in quantum algorithms. The probability of a particle's state emanates from it as a kind of wave. These waves have an effect on the probable state of other particles in an entangled system. There are two types of interference, constructive and destructive. Constructive interference increases the amplitude of the wave, while destructive interference cancels out the amplitude of the wave. For an illustration for this one, you can think of this as throwing stones into a body of calm water. Throwing two stones into the water together at the same time could increase the power of the waves, which would be constructive interference, But two stones thrown further apart, the waves could cancel each other out when they collide, which would be destructive interference. Now, we didn't come up with this all on our own. Some of these concepts we found great explanations for from Microsoft and dummies.com. Right, Nick?
Yeah, among other places. So we'll put some of our notes and references below in the show description. And of course, you can access our show notes over on Discord and over on our Ko-fi shop. So those are some of the basic concepts that unlock the actual power of quantum computing that creates the exponential speed up in computing acceleration from what exists today in classical computers. But let's pivot for a moment and talk about this very often overlooked fact. And that is most technology, just the useful application of scientific discovery, doesn't happen via some singular overnight breakthrough. Most times, it's accomplished via the gradual accumulation of smaller incremental step ups in understanding and figuring things out at an engineering level. So, even in this case of quantum computing, researchers are finally making promising progress towards economically useful commercialization of quantum computers via a lot of incremental steps over the last 50, 60 years, especially. We created this very simple chart to illustrate that whenever there's this big wave of innovation and subsequent growth from the stocks benefiting from these movements, they kind of build off of what came before it. Of course, before the mid 20th century, we had all of these discoveries about electricity and magnetic fields and all sorts of physics that eventually led to the dawn of electronics. And then eventually later, starting in the 70s, personal computers. Then we had, of course, the dawn of the internet in the 1990s. Cloud computing was hot on the heels of that in the 2000s. Right now, AI, especially data center AI, delivered via cloud computing, builds off of what came before it. And then quantum computing is going to be no different. All of the current work in AI and accelerated computing is what will eventually lead to this advance in quantum computing. Now, Kasey, before you go further, let's maybe stop here for just a moment and talk about the fact that there's actually two incremental advances that have been made that are kind of converging and creating this moment in time where quantum computers might be on the cusp of finally becoming useful. And the first one is simply that our electronic devices have become incredibly powerful and already actually have overcome and make use of quantum mechanical effects.
Just a moment ago, we said that the most advanced chips have tens of billions of transistors on them. And manufacturers have been able to cram that many transistors onto such a small piece of silicon by progressively shrinking them down to about a dozen nanometers in dimension. For reference, a single silicon atom is roughly zero point 0.2 nanometers. This means that advanced electronics today need to surmount and, in some cases, make use of quantum mechanical phenomena like quantum tunneling to operate. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that you have a quantum computer riding around in your pocket, but it does mean that technology has reached a point where quantum mechanical effects can be measured, overcome, and even utilized when making and operating classical computing hardware. Therefore, when attempting to make and measure the readings from a quantum computer, that hardware that's now sensitive to the workings of quantum mechanics is incredibly meaningful. What's the second advance that has been made that can make quantum computers possible?
Well, the second is artificial intelligence. And again, more broadly, just calling this accelerated computing infrastructure. And of course, Nvidia has come to embody this movement. They're making tens of billions of dollars every quarter selling accelerated compute infrastructure, especially into data centers. But just like the advances you just talked about, Kasey, this came in steps over the course of many years. An example here, back in 2017, there was a significant study that was written by researchers at Alphabet describing transformer models. This is an easy to digest explanation of what a transformer model is that NVIDIA wrote on its blog about 2 years ago now. But in short, a transformer model is a type of neural network algorithm, of course, based on classical computing, that learns context and then can create new output based on that context that it has learned in the past. So it creates a type of virtuous cycle of AI improvement and helps accelerate research and development efforts in all sorts of industries.
We often explain the semiconductor industry as a virtuous cycle where the most advanced chips and systems today are often recycled back into the top of the funnel to fuel development of tomorrow's most advanced chips and systems. The question is, what are today's most advanced systems? Well, at the moment, it's none other than NVIDIA's GPU powered servers, which come with the ability to string many of these servers together using InfiniBand and also increasingly Ethernet as well to create huge supercomputers. With the acquisition of Mellanox in 2020, NVIDIA latched on to the transformer model breakthrough and has turned itself into an accelerated computing juggernaut.
Now, especially in the last year, as it's become apparent that NVIDIA is going to make a lot of money from these AI servers, talk has begun swirling about custom chips designed by Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, you name it. If a big tech company has some sort of AI aspirations, which of course they all do, there's a pretty good chance that they are working on designing their own chips. As it's pitched by some investors and sometimes even the tech companies themselves, it's pitched as an ability to compete with NVIDIA. Now, perhaps that's true to a certain extent, but a couple of things here. First, none of these custom chips come close to NVIDIA's latest and greatest Blackwell system, paired with NVIDIA's very large library of software algorithms that make those GPUs easy to use. But in addition to that, these so-called custom chips from big tech actually make use of semiconductor intellectual property because they're ultimately getting help from the chip companies themselves that have enough IP to do these really big custom silicon projects. That's something we've talked about in past videos, so we'll digress on that now. But just an example, Google's TPUs, it's on its fifth generation TPU. It bragged that their latest large language model, LLM, Gemini, was trained and operated by that fifth gen TPU. But it's actually Broadcom that's the design partner, the longstanding design partner on those TPUs.
It seems that Google and other big tech companies are doing really good PR work at distracting everyone from what's really happening. They're definitely not buying NVIDIA's advanced systems simply to operate chatbots. In fact, what they're doing is they're buying the best of now to accelerate the development of far more advanced tech. So let's talk a little bit more about NVIDIA. Is NVIDIA the best quantum computing stock right now?
We have come to believe that it is, and we'll explain why. We can go back and think about that research, some of that research that we've cited at the beginning of the video, upwards of 200 billion in annual quantum computing revenue generated by 2040. That's all fine and well. But right now, today, quantum computing, if you can even call it an industry, it's more like a research and development initiative, not an industry, pulls in somewhere between 2 billion and $3 billion per year. Much of this is in the form of government funding and research awards, some funding rounds for startups and the like. And of course, it's impossible to measure just how much of the capital expenditures and research and development work of big tech is going towards quantum computing. Now, some of this quantum computing spend shows up on the financial statements of a handful of those publicly traded quantum computing pure play stocks. One of them we mentioned already, IonQ. The other two that went public via SPAC in 2021 and 2022 were D-Wave Quantum, ticker symbol QBTS, cute, qubits, nice one, D-Wave, and Rigetti Computing, RGTI. We're going to address these three in a different video, but suffice to say, if you just take a quick look at the financials, these are startups. They make very little in the way of revenue. They're not profitable. They are not scooping up anywhere close to anything approaching a dominant share of that 2 to 3 billion in quantum computing spend per year.
There has to be a bridge from classical computing to quantum computing. And it turns out that the big leader in accelerated computing is already making money from the next computational leap from quantum mechanics. CEO Jensen Huang of Nvidia made some comments related to this at the most recent GTC in March of this year. He made the point that you can't just program a quantum computer all by itself. You need to have a classical computing system right there with it, teaching it the algorithms. He said that NVIDIA is a great partner for the quantum computing industry. You can see all of the companies that NVIDIA partners with in regards to quantum computing. They have quantum hardware builders, research centers, system builders and integrators, quantum software and systems. They have a ton of partners in this space.
And of course, the big chunk of this, Casey, the cloud service providers, because not many people are just going to build a quantum computer in their home office, especially. So quantum computing is going to be accessed via the cloud. And so besides NVIDIA, if you want early access to potential growth from this market, look no further than Amazon stock, Alphabet, Microsoft, Oracle Cloud. Those are going to be pretty good bets on, albeit more gradual growth from quantum computing, but still, they're very much going to be in on this movement. Let's jump back to this picture here, though, because NVIDIA is not building its own quantum computer. At least it hasn't disclosed publicly if it's doing that. Whereas a lot of other big tech companies, Microsoft, IBM, Google, have actually been involved in building an actual quantum computer. Instead, NVIDIA has taken this hybrid approach. We wrote about this in early 2023 after the GTC conference over a year ago, where NVIDIA co-announced this GPU accelerated quantum computing control unit along with the startup called Quantum Machines. You already alluded to this in Jensen Huang's more recent commentary on this, Casey, but since a quantum computer's equipment is being built, programmed, and studied atop classical electronics using binary ones and zeros, a quantum computing control unit is needed to orchestrate the operations. So, what Jensen is saying here is these very complex quantum computing systems and the quantum algorithms are not going to be invented out of thin air or in some sort of vacuum, so to speak. It's completely separate from the existing classical computing ecosystem that's been built over the last half century plus. A classical accelerated platform is now powering a lot of the R&D work on development of the hardware itself, like simulating the design of quantum chips, quantum semiconductors. It's accelerating the development of the software and the algorithms, since again, superposition that encodes that exponential leap in information can't operate on classical bits, and also error correction from the readings that a quantum computer puts out.
Nick, you just mentioned error correction, and that is a very important point. A number of quantum computer developers from Microsoft to IBM have made some recent announcements regarding error detection and correction. There is a great deal of instability of the readings from superposition, entanglement, and interference that prevent quantum computers from being economically useful. As sensitive and accurate as modern electronics have become, tiny environmental changes that we can't detect can throw quantum readings off. So, a powerful classical computer can run algorithms to correct these readings, which begin to make quantum computers actually useful.
Yeah, that's a really important point because at this particular stage, you talked about the instruments, the electronics, the sensors, the technology is there, it's available. And other advances in computing, like the cloud and AI, have intersected with that to make these things actually useful. Quantum mechanical effects are very unstable. They don't last for very long. And so you still are always going to need that classical computer sitting next to the quantum computer, perhaps in like a data center or a lab connected to the cloud that constantly runs as like an orchestration unit and a correction unit to make sure that those readings, those exponential speed up in data collection and data crunching is actually useful because even small errors can make the quantum computer completely useless. Okay, so that brings us to one of our final points here for this high level overview. It seems that Nvidia and other big tech are leading the charge into quantum computers. But what are these things actually going to do, anyways?
Well, I don't think you and I are going to be using them in our home office anytime soon. These classical computing, like the laptops that we use, the smartphones that we use, aren't going to go away because that will still be the most efficient way to compute most problems. But primarily, quantum computers are going to be used to solve very large, impossibly complex optimization problems for big industrial businesses and sprawling enterprises. Thanks to the very nature of quantum mechanics and the probabilities that govern subatomic particles, quantum computers seem to hold particular promise in optimizing outcomes when there are a large number of possible combinations or possibilities.
Yeah, just as an example, if you take a look at some of the quantum research going on via Microsoft Azure, their quantum computing that's accessible via Azure, and then also IBM, some of the use cases they cite range from discoveries into new chemistries and material science, pharmaceutical and drug discovery, biological and physics studies, supply chain management, financial planning and modeling. Again, just to reiterate this, classical computers will continue to be the most economically viable way to calculate and run most software for a very, very long time, for many decades. It's these really, really big, giant problems with lots of different outcomes, lots of different inputs where quantum computers hold promise. Ironically, if you kind of sift through some of Microsoft's documentation, not the most like public facing PR on how amazing quantum computers are, but if you actually sift through some of the developer documents, one of the biggest use cases for quantum computing right now is figuring out what problem quantum computers can solve in the first place. Because that in of itself is one of the biggest problems and bottlenecks right now. What's the actual problem the quantum computer is going to solve? Because setting aside some of the hypey comments about AI and what is that called? Singularity, AI singularities and whatnot. We're not there yet where we can just simply ask AI to go solve a problem and it just figures out how to do it all by itself. Probably still a long ways off from that being a reality.
So, the ultimate question then is when will this quantum revolution arrive? And the answer is that widespread commercialization is likely still a few years away at the minimum. And we'll use our semiconductor industry flowchart to illustrate why that is. Building a fault tolerant quantum computer isn't enough. An entire supply chain and software development ecosystem will also need to be built in the industry using the industry that already exists today. When you look at just how complex the semiconductor industry is, it'll be just as much with quantum computing. So, Nick and I at Chipstock Investor are in full agreement that quantum computing as a full blown industry and investable theme is still years away. In our opinion, most investors should instead be content owning stocks like Nvidia, the cloud computing giants, and other big tech that are already steadily funneling some R&D budget into quantum computing.
And there's another catch all approach to this that we frequently mention. When in doubt, just buy a trustworthy ETF with a long term track record of market outperformance. So, our two long-standing favorites, our longtime holdings in our portfolio, Vanguard Growth, ticker symbol VUG, which gets you all of the growth stocks and the S&P 500. So this is a passive large cap market cap weighted fund. And then of course features all the tech giants that are making investments into quantum computing. And in addition to that, we also own a Vanguard Information Technology ETF or VGT, which is also stilted towards those large caps, but specifically just technology companies. And while it is stilted towards large caps, you also have this long tail, hundreds of mid cap and small cap stocks that are also in the portfolio, albeit small positions in that portfolio, but some of which could emerge as tomorrow's leaders in quantum computing. So if you're in doubt about this, or you're just not all that interested in continuing to follow the development of quantum computing, an ETF, perhaps like those, might be a good way to just buy and forget about it for the next 5 years. And then we can check in when 2030 gets here and see if the quantum computing hype has transpired or not. And if it has, you've probably benefited from two of those ETFs like that.
We're going to be posting our notes regarding this episode. It's quite extensive. Nick worked really hard on this, explaining this, hopefully in a digestible fashion. We'll make sure that those notes are over on our Ko-fi shop for purchase a la carte, or they will, of course, be available to our members on Discord. You can join the membership here on YouTube or over on Ko-fi, and that'll get you access to our Discord channel. In our next video about quantum computing, we'll answer this question. What is that thing?
Yeah, good question. Everybody likes to show a picture that looks similar to this one, but what the hell is that in the first place?
We'll find out in our next episode on quantum computing. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That's a free and easy way to support us here at Chipstock Investor. Helps us keep cranking these videos out and producing some good investment content. We'll see you all again very soon next week at Chipstock Investor.